Hello, it's nice to be here. I'm nowhere near as often into Uzbekistan as Rod. I think this is just my 6th visit, but I've been on this ESP reform project, Inspire You, thank you for the increase in volume, for the last 2 years. And it already feels like home, so I'm very happy to be part of your family. I'm very curious about where you're all from, so just can we have a few shows of hands? How many of you are teachers? That's most of you. How many of you are teacher trainers? Oh, about a fifth of you. Okay. How many of you from Uzbekistan? How many of you aren't from Uzbekistan? Okay, well, welcome. So about 10 of you. Well, welcome. It's really nice that you're here too. And the last question is, how many of you use technology in your teaching, in your work? Okay, about half of you. Good. Interesting. So, if you use technology in your teaching, do you ever feel like that? Yes, all sorts of things can lead you to this. A lack of skills, a lack of information, too many things going on in your life. Actually, what you would like to feel is probably, the next slide, calm, peaceful organization. So one of the things that we're going to be looking at then in this talk is how we might go towards achieving this sort of relatively calm state while we're using technology. It's official. IT is official. Did you know that there was a presidential decree on foreign language learning in 2012, and the government has a policy of developing computer-based education, and there was a presidential decree on university reform in 2017 which advocates wide use of the latest innovative technologies. Did you know this? Okay, so the government is behind us. Okay. The big question, of course, is are we using IT because they told us to use IT, sort of relates to the curriculum as Rod was talking about, or is it because it's something we feel is right to be doing? Well, that's a question for you to ask yourselves. The project that I'm involved in is Inspire You, and we have incorporated IT into that project. And at the moment, there are many positives, but we are at early stages. Here are some of the uses of it, in case you're not familiar with the project. So it introduces teachers and learners to new tools like Moodle. Are you all familiar with Moodle? Yes. Okay, right. So Moodle is an LMS, a learner management platform. It's very big. It's like opening a huge box. Inside there are lots of tools. There are lots of assumptions about how you can teach. It's continually changing. In other words, you can't just open Moodle and say, oh yes, I can see how to use it. Once you go inside that box, for some people it's a mystery. They don't quite know what to do next. Some people, as I say in my workshops, just press every button until they've worked out what's going in there. But a lot of people are quite hesitant. And we're starting as a road in trying to help people feel more comfortable in that environment. Oh, thank you. The project is also including elements of blended learning. So we're coming to grips with blended learning. That's the mixture of face-to-face learning and online learning. In some instances, some of the teachers are interested in using something called flipped learning. They can see straight away that a really good use of online learning is to make the center of attention the technology itself. So they get the students to do all of their learning of key content before they come to the class. Then they come to the class and they activate it, they discuss it. That's a bit like the CEO of the big company called Amazon. You know Amazon? Okay. Jeff, his name is Jeff Bezos, another Jeff. Did you know he banned PowerPoint? Yeah. Employees who have meetings in Amazon are not allowed to give PowerPoint presentations. What they have to do is learn the content with PowerPoint if they want to, before they come to the meeting. When they come to the meeting, they can only ask questions and discuss. So if you like, that's like a flipped learning version of running meetings within a company. And that gives you a sort of idea of the things that you can do in the classroom. Imagine how it frees you up. So you don't spend your class talking about grammar, but you help the students to use technology to practice grammar at home. Maybe they can do some reading at home. They can practice all of the skills at home, investigate, and then somehow discuss, have role plays, practice the things that they've been learning at home once they come to class. If you like that challenge, read up about it and see if you can include it yourself. The project is also helping us to source authentic materials. One of the big changes is that we're basing our syllabuses on a needs analysis of the real needs. Now, if you go to a company, say a tourism company, and you ask them, what is it that our teachers, or what is it that our students need to be able to do? They could give you a list of things, and normally, or in the past, people would say, right, what's the best course book that matches these needs? But what we're finding is it's sometimes very difficult to find a course book. So we encourage teachers to actually set up their own syllabus based on authentic materials from the real world. And what's the easiest way to find this? It's very often on the internet. I'm jealous of you. 20 years ago, I would have loved to have the internet. But I used to go to airports with an extra suitcase and pick up brochures and maps and all sorts of extra things, which I could use in my classroom as an English language teacher. Now you can just press a button on the internet and you've got some of these authentic materials. Our teachers are also responsible for writing their syllabuses, and often it's useful to use the internet to find out key concepts in a given syllabus. So if you take management, if you're still not totally sure what are the key concepts that should go into a management syllabus, you can Google it and you can find lots of different models on the internet which you can use to inform, adjust what you're writing your syllabus. So it helps give you the confidence to go ahead with what you're doing. You're not alone. Also, assessment is part of what we're doing. For example, we have a pre and post language test, and we've chosen to use Aptis. I think you'll probably hear more about Aptis from Vicky coming after me. The point is that we have very quick, easy communication using my teacher's favorite tool, which is Telegram. I often find it chaotic, but I am so happy that if someone has a question, they can get to me straight away. I can try to organize an answer either personally or by redirecting them to someone else. So these are just some of the positive things that we're using technology for on our project. But sometimes things go wrong. What can go wrong? Well, I had a 3-day workshop last weekend with some TEL specialists. You all know what TEL is. Technology, enhanced, language, learning. Good. Make sure that you know that. And some of the things that they came up with are problems which I think it's worth sharing with everyone. So, for example, they mentioned that sometimes there's a lack of equipment for TEL. Yeah? Do you recognize this problem? Next. Maybe there's a poor internet connection. Yes. Sometimes there's a low digital literacy in teachers and learners. Yeah? By digital literacy, we mean some of the most basic things. They don't know how to set up an email. They can't type very efficiently. They forget their passwords. So, you know that problem. So a lot of time is wasted and confidence is eroded because people don't know the basics. Sometimes educational platforms and equipment are expensive. Next. And they mentioned that educational leaders lack familiarity with TEL. And the last one, I think, on the list was how sometimes overloaded teachers can't cope with TEL responsibilities. Do you recognize this problem? So it's somehow seen as an extra, okay? We know that you've got your syllabus and your class. Well, we're just going to bring in this extra tool. You know, it's just like using another course, but really, the trouble is it isn't, is it? Because it can lead to some very big problems. So, and change can be very painful. Have you ever felt like this? Something goes wrong and you fall over. So why do changes fail? Well, Rod was looking at this just now from a sort of one perspective. I thought it would be interesting to look at it also from a sort of business perspective. And there's one entrepreneur called Torben Rick, you probably haven't heard of, but you might have seen these statistics. Have you ever heard this? 70% of change efforts fail to meet the target impact. So that means that people set out on some sort of reform project, maybe it's in a business, maybe it's in a school, but it doesn't quite have the impact it wants. Rod was talking about how it takes a long time to make things come true, and sometimes people haven't sort of thought through the time implications carefully enough. So why is this? Well, according to Torben Rick, 33% of change efforts fail because management behavior doesn't support the change. So, in other words, the people who are controlling the situation haven't really understood, don't know the implications, don't know what the constraints and the needs are in order to fully support the situation. Next. 39% of the efforts fail because employees are resistant to change. Again, this reflects a little bit of what Rob was saying. 14% of efforts fail because of a lack of adequate funds or resources. And then the last one, he mentions 14% of efforts fail for other reasons, which he doesn't disclose. And there's some quite useful hooks there to base the next ideas on how we might deal with these problems. So we don't want to be like that. Next. We want to try to find a solution. Where there's a problem, there's a solution, isn't there? So what I thought would be interesting here would be to look at some of the key ideas in change management, because this is what it's about. We're moving from a situation where we didn't have much technology to a situation where technology is integrated into the education that we're doing. Let's take a few of these ideas. In particular, I'm going to focus on these three areas of communication, people, and organization. So with communication, next, there's this idea that you can make the formal case to define what the change is and why it's happening. Okay? So what do we mean by this formal case? Well, actually set it out in the curriculum or some sort of official statement so that it's clear to everyone what it is that you're trying to achieve and why. And the second one is make sure that you communicate the message so that everyone knows about it at all levels, and ask for feedback. I find one of the most disconcerting things is actually to send out a message which you consider to be important, but you don't know what other people think about it. So continually ask for feedback, and that allows you to clarify the message, to amend the message, and to make sure that people around you, above you and below you, sort of understand what's going on. So two useful ideas from communicate. Next one, so people. Would you agree with that? If you can't read it, stay away from negative people. They have a problem for every solution. We're not in the problem business, we're in the solution business. So, I think with people it's very important to address the human side specifically. So, find out how are people coping with this sort of digital changes within their work, and how is it impacting them on their home lives. I mean, there are a lot of stories in the press at the moment in Europe about how, people aren't sleeping much, They're getting very stressed because they sleep with their smartphone next to their bed and they say, oh, there's a message. So at 3 o'clock in the night, I mean, I work closely with Saida and sometimes we both know, what? Saida, why were you up in the middle of the night? And she, well, why were you up in the middle of the night? I mean, it's a big problem. We do need to sort of manage our time. But so we need to sort of stop, reflect on that and maybe control it a little better. With people, speak to individuals. So, find out what individuals feel about what's going on. Next one. And there's this idea as well in change management that you can recruit champions of change. So identify people around you who are really enthusiastic about what you're doing, who show some sort of leadership qualities, and help them, encourage them to be sort of champions of the change, because they can then become models and inspiring figures for other people around you in the project. And this last one is create ownership. Isn't it nice when you feel the project belongs to you? I got this feeling when you were talking about preset just now, that you feel as if it belongs to you. Is that right? Yes. Oh, not a very strong response. Yes. Hang on, I'm not there yet. Okay. So I look at ways of helping people to feel part of it and own it. And there are lots of different sort of techniques to doing this. I mean, you can encourage people to write blogs or newsletters, give people extra responsibilities for something, get feedback, anything that you can do which gets people involved and helps them relate to the project. Okay, and the third area then was organization. And a key element of this is really starting at the top. By what I mean here is starting at the top of organization. So make sure that people who have power and money know what you're trying to do and support the issue. If you have a grassroots attempt, it's satisfying for you and your small group, but it often doesn't impact over a long period of time on other people in the organization. And maybe this was the problem that Rod was alluding to in Indonesia with your colleagues, that involve every layer. Again, we've heard this idea before. So one of the problems that the TEL group mentioned to me was that administration in some of your institutions don't seem to know what you're doing with technology. Find a way of helping them to understand what's going on and appreciate it so that they're in a better place to support you. Next. Assess the cultural landscape. So maybe there are cultural differences in attitudes towards technology, which you need to take into consideration. And finally, prepare for the unexpected. One of the key things about technology is it often doesn't work. And before I was coming on here, I thought, oh, what will I do if my PowerPoint presentation doesn't work? So I'd sort of memorized everything I was going to talk about just so that I could talk to you instead. I've seen this happen at some really big, expensive conferences. Suddenly, electricity goes or something like that. So always have another plan. Think how you can control the situation. Okay, so solving TEL problems in Uzbekistan. Going back to those problems then that we talked about before. So if there's a lack of equipment for TEL, there may be strategic planning from the top. Can help solve this. Next. Poor internet connection. Well, use training you can include training to use the resources in the best way. So for example, if you understand some of the problems with poor internet connections, you might know that if you had everyone in this room now on the internet, does our signal get stronger or weaker? Weaker. I mean, it should be obvious to you, but if you think about things like that, and you say, okay, we've got a weak internet connection, everyone turn off their computer, and just one person is going to use it. Just simple things like think about the practical implications of the technology and how you can manage them so that you can get the best out of a given situation. I've noticed a lot of differences amongst you. Some people are very quick to find an alternative technological solution to a problem, and other people say, I don't know what to do. And what I've also seen amongst some teachers is that they don't know what to do, so they just say, well, I'll leave it. Maybe it'll be better next year. Try to find a solution. Next one, low digital literacy in teachers. Well, yes, we need to recognize this digital literacy. We need to do a study, find out what the problems are, and organize some sort of consistent, systematic digital literacy training. Okay, maybe suggestions that we had the other day, for example, were having a 1-week course for teachers and students, which makes sure that they understand the basics of digital literacy. That will help them save time. As a lot of you may know, I have a pet, like with touch typing. When I go to the doctor in England or Germany, where I live, they usually use 2 fingers to type. They go... And then I read in the newspaper the next day, doctors don't have enough time to see all of the patients. And I thought, well, if they all learn to touch type, they will probably save 3 or 4 minutes per patient. Then they can see more patients. And it really is, it's a real problem. I don't know why they don't do that. It took me 1 week to learn to type 40 words per minute. It's a really good investment of your time. So if you haven't done it, make a promise to yourself to touch type. And if you haven't done it, I'll say the same thing again next time. It's one of the most useful things you can do. If you touch type means you type without looking at the keys. If you have to look at the keys, it's okay, but at least use more than 2 fingers. Do you promise? Good. Educational platforms and equipment sometimes are expensive. Well, don't worry about it. There's a lot of free software available. There are these OERs, that's Open Educational Resources. If you Google OER, you'll find a lot of sites and directories which will help you move towards free programs. Moodle itself is free. Not totally free, you still need someone who runs a server, who provides support. But there are certainly ways of finding cheaper alternatives to almost everything these days, so that doesn't need to be a reason for putting you off. Next one, educational leaders lack familiarity with TEL. I think this is very important. We mentioned this before. Involve all levels to improve understanding and cooperation. Yep. And overloaded teachers can't cope. Well, acknowledge the time needed to develop resources and compensate teachers. So if any of you here have power, then really take this on board seriously. It takes a long time to build up materials, especially when you start. One of the key advantages of using Moodle eventually is that you have a set of materials online which can be reused with slight modifications. But in the first instance, someone has to spend a lot of time actually producing those materials, producing assessments, etc., making sure they work. So if you have power, think about that. If you don't have power, write a systematic document or a clear document to the people who are in power so that they understand this implication and they try to help you with that. Have you seen this before? So this is a bell curve which shows the technology adoption cycle. This came out about 20 years ago, I think. The idea is that whenever there's some sort of technical innovation, there will always be some people who are at the forefront of the changes. And they are, in this, they're called the innovators. They're on the left. Can you see them? Are there many of them? No, there's usually 1 or 2% of the people. They are usually risk takers. Yeah, they see a purpose in something and they move with it. Most teachers aren't innovators. Okay, following closely behind them are the early adopters. So that means you've got some sort of technological change, and other people understand this change and they start using it quite quickly. What's a common characteristic of these first two is that they usually have strong opinions and they publish those opinions. They want other people to hear about them and they make themselves known. A lot of teachers, again, aren't like that. They tend to be more modest about how they think. In the third block, you've got the early majority. And these tend to be people, it's interesting, in the original study, they tend to be people who are more affluent, they have more money, and usually a slightly better level of education, and they try to follow through with these ideas once they have the confidence to follow a large group of people around them. Once you've got those three first groups on board, you have this critical mass. You've got 50% of the population who are going with you. And then slowly but surely, the late adopters, who are usually more conservative people, maybe not so affluent, follow. And then in the very last group, you've got what I think they call laggards. Laggards are people who don't really care, actually. They'll be dragged into it. They tend to be older people, but not always. I'm getting older, but I'm definitely not in the laggard group. So the question to ask yourself is, where do you fit into that? Are you watching and waiting for other people to see, or do you want to be part of the sort of early adopters? There isn't a right or a wrong place, but it's good to challenge yourself. If you identify with a group that's trying to move this on, then make that part of your life, your work. Okay, next please. So, how can well-managed TEL change impact on English reform? Well, one model which might be useful, which we used on our TEL workshop just now, is this TPAC model. There are three inner circles. There's the top one, which is T, technology. Bottom left, the yellow one, is pedagogy, pedagogical knowledge. And the bottom right is content knowledge. And it's all about interaction and sort of working together within a system here. Can you think of teachers, for example, who have a really good content knowledge? Maybe they're a geography teacher, they know a lot about geography, but they can't teach. So what do they typically do? They come to class and they talk at the students. They don't necessarily get them involved. They don't check whether the learners are following them or not. Until now, a really good combination then is to have teachers with good content knowledge and pedagogical knowledge. They know how to get the best out of the learning situation. Now we've got a third element in this model, which is technology. I noticed when I was a teacher before that some people were so enamored of technology, it took over their lives. And they thought, look at this tool, it's fantastic, let's use it. Look at this. They were like children in a toy shop. They wanted to use everything. But they forgot to include pedagogy and maybe even content. So it's quite important, actually, when we plan training and we plan the use of technologies, that we include all of these. It's very easy the first time you use Moodle just to take a text and just plonk it straight on Moodle. Instead, you can make it much more beautiful and interactive by including images and audio and video, etc., and make sure that the students understand the task, etc. So keep that in mind as well. If you're interested in that, Google TPAC. I can't talk anymore. Next one. What's the impact of this? Next. Well, this is my last slide. Managing TEL will lead to enhanced learning and teaching. Enhanced because it can help with developing more autonomous and independent learners. Next. Enriched learning because you have access to far more resources. And the next. And enlightened learning because you can become aware of different approaches to what's going on. So it's actually bringing you to this interesting, exciting global world. Next. And it will help Uzbekistan as a global player and a regional leader in TEL. How would that feel? Yes. Next one. Okay. Don't forget, that's how you want to feel while you're using it. Next. Next. Okay, so thank you. Rahmat. Спасибо за внимание.